Hi, it's Lisa at Wild Eye Embroidery. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to show you today how to do the long and short stitch. Now, as the name would suggest, this is made up of a number of stitches which are obviously long and short. And we would use this to fill in areas which are too big for the like of satin stitch. If you do satin stitch for an area that length, it can stick up and it can be a bit springy and it is hard to keep it neater. So if you're doing a longer distance, the long and short stitch is a great filling stitch. Now there are different ways of doing it. Some people like to come down literally one long stitch, one short stitch, one long, one short, and keep the stitches of equal lengths. In other words, the long stitches all the same across. So for example, you might come down to there for your long stitch, and then from the top down for short stitch. The disadvantage with doing it one long stitch and then a shorter stitch and keeping those stitches the same length each time, in other words all the longs the same and all the short stitches the same length, is that it can look a little bit blocky. Now that's maybe the effect you're going for, but if you're trying to transition from one colour to another, it is much better to do some longer and some shorter. You'll see it especially in the bottom row, there's some starting up here, some down here and so on. It means you can blend in colours gradually, so I'm going to show you how to do that today. Now what I want to do is go from a blue through to a purple with a hint of blue in it, and then through to a deeper purple. So first of all I'm going to start with my blue thread. Now I have made a couple of additional markings on this square, and you'll see my first one is here, and that is where the first row will be. Having said that, as I said before, you want some of your stitches to be long and you might bring them right down to that row. Some might come slightly over and some will be a little shorter. It's going to go up and down like waves. Now you will see on the diagram I have drawn here that at the bottom I have made the last row a lot smaller. You'll see, because what will happen is from the first row here it'll come down, some will come right down here, then the second row some will come down here, and what can happen is you can end up with too much on the colour in the bottom, so you'll see that as we go along. So I'm going to start my first stitch then. Personally I prefer for any embroidery, especially long and short stitch, I like to work left to right, top to bottom. It doesn't really matter what way you go. Some people might want to start at the bottom, but if you're trying to get a crisp line, it's just for me, I do like to start up here. So the first stitch I will bring down right on where my first marking is. This is me dividing it up into 3 sections so we can use those 3 colours. So there's our first one. And then the technique here is to keep the stitches different lengths. You don't want them all to look the same. You don't want it to be too uniform, because that's what leads to blockiness. Then I'm going to go even shorter this time. This time I'm going to come right into the second section's colour. This will help blend everything later on once we start the second row and use a different colour. If you're not sure where you're going, sometimes it's helpful to bring the thread down, not only to stop you going too far to one side, but also decide where you want to put this. So again, I'm trying to avoid every single stitch being the same length, so I don't want to put it right here, I want to bring it down a wee bit this time. I'm just carrying on making stitches across, just trying to be as random as I can with the lengths. Come right down into the second section again. And you'll get the odd stitch there, you'll maybe leave too big a gap. Now's the time to fix that. And for our last stitch, I don't like it to look too much the same, so I'll not go directly opposite. We'll come a little shorter on that one and go straight through the line. And a little bit gappy there, so we'll sneak another stitch in. Okay, so now we're going to do our second row in our purple colour. What you want to try and do is actually pierce between the strands of your previous row if you can. Now we'll be doing that from underneath, but just to show you on the camera here, ideally you want to separate your strands and get your needle coming up right in between your strands. If you can't do that, because maybe it'll make your stitching slanty, you might have a case where you need to put your next stitch in here. So you might need to put it between two actual stitches and not pierce through the strands. That's still okay, but try and do a combination of both, and ideally as many split stitches, i.e. sewing right through the strands as you can. It makes it much smoother. If you come up between two strands all the time, it can look a little bit gappy because it tends to push these strands apart and you may see your fabric. It's not the end of the world. You probably see me doing some of that here, so we'll see how it goes as we go along. But definitely split your first stitch. If I come up here, it's going to leave a distinctive hole, a distinctive gap there, and you don't want to do that. So to come up through your last stitch, you want to get near the end of the stitch, like that. And as you can see right there, I've come up right between those two strands, close to the end, not the very end. We don't want to go through the same hole because that'll leave a tiny gap which will show. So for your first stitch, it is really, really important to split it. So I'll come down to my guide mark there. Now you may find it harder to split your second stitch, but don't be afraid to go backwards. Now I know I'm going to have to go back in and fill a gap, but let's split the second one and then we'll decide how far I want to come. just like you did at the start of that row, make sure you split your last stitch. Again, just another little one in there to make that nice and smooth. Okay, so now moving on to our final purple colour. Okay, so we'll move on to our final row. Usually find it's a bit easier because you obviously don't have to work out the length of the stitch. You're just filling in the gaps and coming right down to the bottom edge of your pattern. At any stage, if you don't think there's enough variety in your stitches, don't be afraid to go up a bit higher. I'm going to split right up here. Okay, that is now the pattern markings removed, and just to let you see the final result. So it would be great if you could give me a like at the end of the film, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to see my latest content. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.